Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, I'm going to be showcasing two of the newly buffed Pokemon from the Season 21 Balance Update, and that is Fang Steelix and the double buff to Shadow Electivire. First up, Shadow Electivire now gets more damage with its fast move Thunder Shock, and its bait move Ice Punch now does more damage as well. This makes an already attack-weighted Pokemon absolutely deadly as a closer, and I'm running Fang Steelix as the safe switch. Fang now has the same energy generation as Dragon Tails, making Fang a very viable side grade. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches and take a look at this team in action in the Open Great League. Hopping into the first match, leading Shadow Jumpluff into Feraligatr. Now Jumpluff is a very good flying type, but where it's not the best is as a grass type. Like versus Feraligatr, for example, it's a pretty negative matchup, although this Feraligatr is actually running Crunch. And that's part of why I do have two Pokemon in the back that are going to be stronger into the water types, so that way I can mainly use Jumpluff as a flying type attacker. Here my opponent is going to save switch into Diggersby taking massive damage from Energy Ball. I can very comfortably survive a Fire Punch, even though Fire Punch did get extra damage this season as well, and make it to Energy Ball number 2. This Energy Ball is going to pick up a knockout, down goes Diggersby, and I'm probably going to look to switch out of this matchup if they send in their third. They do. They're going to send in their Clodsire. I respond with the Steelix, and they're going to switch out and bring in Feraligatr. Shadow Hydro Cannon is going to do big damage to the Steelix. Steelix now going to go for a Psychic Fangs to deliver a knockout. Opponent is going to end up committing the shield. They're looking for a farm down, but it's a simultaneous KO. And now let's see what the hype is about as Electivire enters the field of play. Electivire has straight 5 pacing for Wild Charge and 5-4 pacing for Ice Punch, and look at the damage. Now my opponent does not have a high rank Clodsire. It won't do quite this much to a high rank Clodsire, but right off the bat, the damage from Shadow Electivire is absolutely outrageous. Ice Punch number 2 nearly one-shots. We switch into the Jumpluff to force their energy, and from here this is just a very straightforward win as I get to Thunder Shock down a ground type with Electivire and take the game 1 win. Moving to the next match, Shadow Jumpluff versus Ariados. I'm expecting them to throw instantly, so I overfarm, but they actually overfarm as well, perfectly reading me like a book, and we end up CMP tying on 6. The nice thing for Jumpluff is I do get to outpace in this matchup as I'm on 5-4 pacing and they're on straight 5. They shield the first, but I'm going to get to this second Aerial Ace, and while it will not KO, it will do quite a lot of damage, and then I can look to switch out. So the Aerial Ace lands, I can save switch into the Steelix, opponent responds with a Talonflame, but this is not an amazing response to Steelix anymore. These Thunderfangs add up quite significantly. Crunch is going to land, and if they want to KO, they're going to need to run Flame Charge, but most Talonflame do not run Flame Charge anymore. Instead, they go for the Brave Bird. Brave Bird doesn't KO. I get a farm down, and I exit with a Psychic Fangs loaded as well. In comes Ariados. Ariados could have thrown to deny the energy, but instead, they end up committing the shield, so maybe a miscount there from the opponent. They realize they're not going to poison this thing down. They're forced to throw energy, and from here, I should just be in a winning position with the Shadow Electivire. A Shadow Electivire, when the opponent doesn't have shields, is just absolutely terrifying. They go for the lunge. They're trying to make another move. They do not get there. In the back is going to be Dunsparce. And this is just, even though I'm debuffed, a very comfortable double Wild Charge win. So Wild Charge number 1 connects, and that's a -1 Wild Charge. That's a debuffed move. I can go for Wild Charge number 2. Dunsparce removed from the field of play, and that's a win. Hopping into the next match, leading Shadow Jumpluff into Carbink. Not the most comfortable lead ever, but this is where the bulk of Jumpluff can be quite nice. Jumpluff, of course, will be able to outpace Carbink, as Carbink's pacing is not the fastest, and I'm going to look to land an Energy Ball. Energy Ball lands, that does some significant damage. The switch to Steelix and the catch, that's massive, getting them to waste their energy. Rock Slide does less than nothing. In comes Decidueye. I guess it does make sense to pair Carbink with grass types, but that's not the grass type I was expecting. I decide to commit the shield here, and I'm going to go for the Crunch. Decidueye is a pretty glassy Pokemon, so I'm hoping Crunch will do a ton of damage. The Crunch actually gets no shielded here, and here's where I actually make a pretty big misplay. It turns out that I shouldn't have shielded that first Frenzy Plant. I thought that I would outpace, but that's just me not being familiar with the counts on Decidueye. So going down a shield and still losing switch is a pretty terrible play for me. But again, that's just not a Pokemon I'm used to seeing. I have a ton of energy, so I bait the Carbink, get the shield, and now I can guarantee the final shield or just knock them out with the Energy Ball. Energy Ball is going to connect. Down goes Carbink. In the back is Superior. I make the Aerial Ace, but this is not a winning CMP tie for Jumpluff. So I am going to let this go and then just trust in the Shadow Electivire to close out the game. Ice Punch has been boosted in terms of damage this season. Let's see how hard it hits versus Superior. They're not going to let me find out, as they will commit the shield. But this is only an Aerial Ace, so I do not have to shield here. Instead, I can just let that go and make it to the Ice Punch, and again playing to the CMP tie. Superior, one of the bulkiest grass types in the game. Ice Punch still nearly one-hit KOs, but this is going to be a very close endgame. Can I get the Thunder Shock down here before they get the Vine Whip down, and the game ends in a tie? If the opponent didn't CMP tie there, they actually would have won, but instead the game will end in a tie. Opponent is going to save switch into Bibarel. I'm going to farm up, switch into Steelix, and catch what I'm hoping is going to be a Hyper Fang, and it is. That is an absolutely massive catch. As now their energy has been wasted, I can farm up a ton with Steelix, and they can fire off a Surf, but I can tank that. Successfully catching that Hyper Fang just puts me in such an advantageous position. I fire off the Psychic Fangs because I believe after the Psychic Fangs, I will get a farm down and I get to exit with a decent amount of energy as well. In comes Annihilate. Annihilate going to be met with the Psychic Fangs that will, of course, apply a debuff. Doesn't do a ton of damage, but now they're very comfortably in Aerial Ace range, and in the back is Feraligatr, and the opponent was ABA weak to Jumpluff. Now, this is a rare moment where Jumpluff can actually do well into Feraligatr because I'm so far ahead in terms of energy, and I'm just always going to let this go. Opponent is actually running Crunch on the Feraligatr, but even if it was Ice Beam, I'm still just in a winning position, and this is where we see the buff to Thunder Shock being clutch on Feraligatr, because I'm not going to throw a move into Feraligatr. I'm just going to fully farm them down and leave with the back-to-back wild charges. Those Thunder Shocks honestly do outrageous damage now, and I just have the back-to-back wild charges loaded for the Annihilate. And Annihilate only has one shield to hide behind. They can shield the first, but you cannot shield the second. Wild charge is massive overkill onto Annihilate, and the game ends in victory. Moving to the next match, we've got Spice from the opponent. Oh my goodness, Shadow Jumpluff versus Shadow Amoonguss. Shadow Amoonguss can run a variety of different charge attacks, including Sludge Bomb, and if they have it, I do need to respect it. They're going to shield up the first. They throw on alignment there, so they do give me a free Fairy Wind, which is quite nice, and there is the Sludge Bomb right on cue. A save switch into Dunsparce. Dunsparce, I think I should have just instantly gone into Steelix here instead of going for a chip. My goal is to try and go for a catch, but my opponent does not fall for it, and now they get to land Drill Run after Drill Run in this matchup. So the Drill Run is going to connect. The nice thing about the regular Steelix is that I will be able to tank 2 Drill Runs. That's part of the reason why I did run the regular, because it does have a lot more bulk considering my other 2 Mons are Shadows. Here I'm going to go for Psychic Fangs, and I'm actually going to hope that my opponent knocks me out here. I want them to throw the energy so I can farm with Electivire, but they make a really good play. They end up banking the energy and switching. I wanted them to KO me there so then I could just get farm on Electivire, but my opponent did not let that happen, which is very unfortunate for me. I'm going to be firing off the Aerial Ace. Opponent does end up committing the shield, and I think I have to try and sweep with Shadow Electivire. Sludge Bomb picks up the KO. I'm saving the shield for Electivire, and here is where Electivire can be a bit of a blessing and a curse. The damage output is unreal, but I'm getting shredded by Astonish. Ice Punch, KOs, in the back is Pangoro, and I'm firing off the Wild Charge. I have to KO this Dunsparce in 3 Thunder Shocks, or I will lose. In comes the Dunsparce. They tank it on 1 HP, and it's a heartbreaking defeat. Moving to the next match, Jumpluff versus Azumarill. I can outpace here, so I'm going to stay in, throw the Energy Ball, and then I'm going to look to do 1 Fairy Wind and a catch onto the Steelix. Because ideally, the Steelix is where I want to be absorbing charge moves on this team. So I land the Energy Ball, I get the catch, which puts me in a terrific position. Now they're forced out. They send in Haunter. Oh my goodness, the spice from the opponent. Again, these are early season battles, so you're going to see some interesting movesets and interesting Mons, but I definitely have to respect Haunter. I guess Haunter did get a buff this season too. It does have access to Ice Punch. Of course, Ice Punch not a requirement to run. Unfortunately, I do survive that, which gives them slightly more farm, but now it's my turn to farm. I'm going to go for a 1 shield farm down with the Shadow Electivire. Opponent, Shadow Ball, so they're actually not running Ice Punch, and we'll see what they have in the back, and it's Drift Blim. I have to be very careful. Astonish will do a ton of damage farming with the Electivire. I get to the back-to-back wild charges, so I can just fully sacrifice the Jumpluff. For Jump Pluff, I'm going to make sure that I take a little bit of extra damage because I want to only be in a range where 2 Astonishes can KO. I don't want to give them any extra farm. And now they will get their 2 Astonishes, but I have back-to-back moves loaded on the Electivire, so the game is over. I get to fire off the Ice Punch. I mean, Ice Punch will KO here, but since they shield the first, now I get to go for a massive overkill on the Wild Charge. Shadow Electivire, it's super frail, but if you can position it correctly, it is just devastating. Tough lead in the next match, leading into Clodsire. Opponent is going to counter switch into Feraligatr, and Shadow Hydro Cannon does not KO from this range, but it does quite a lot of damage. So in hindsight, maybe I should have let that go because that's a move I can survive from this health range. But I decide to shield, go for the Psychic Fangs. Opponent is going to shield themselves, and this is where things get a little bit tricky. I can double shield for Switch, but Switch doesn't do a lot for me considering the team is fairly soft to Clodsire. So instead, I'm just going to go for farm on Electivire, as Electivire hits very, very hard. Opponent is going to bring in the Clodsire. I'm farming up quite a lot with the Electivire, and let's see this damage. Ice Punch into the Clodsire. Clodsire barely hangs on above 50% HP, so this is a high rank Clodsire. Ice Punch number 2 gets them deep into the red. I switch into the Jump Pluff. This isn't really a catch though, because they were going to go for a Sludge Bomb anyway, because Electivire is so frail, but I basically just need to throw away the Jump Pluff, and then trust that Electivire will be able to sweep in the end game for me. In the back, it's going to be Starmie, and even though I have the type advantage, I'm just too low. I get Psywave down, and it turns out that maybe if I had saved the Jump Pluff, I could have been in a better position. Speaking of being in bad positions, leading into Arctibax is very painful. I save switch into Steelix, and my opponent responds with a Golurk. My Thunderfangs are double resisted, but Crunch will hit for a ton of damage. Opponent gets debuffed, they do commit the shield, and I have a bit of a tough choice to make here. This line is regrettably very, very soft to Arctibax, so having put out an Arctibax video yesterday at the time of recording this, maybe not the greatest time to run a line that's very, very soft to Arctibax, but it's a little tough to build around Electivire without being soft to Arctibax, so I think, unfortunately, it's just a risk that I have to take. They're going to go for Shadow Punch after Shadow Punch. They're low enough that I believe I can just KO with an Aerial Ace because they did get debuffed. Aerial Ace is going to pick up the knockout. In comes the Arctibax. Ice Fangs will shred me, but I make the Aerial Ace. Aerial Ace won't KO, but it does a solid amount of damage, and they give up the final shield, and that's kind of just game over. I am going to be debuffed here by an Icy Wind, but I have an Electivire in the zeros, and that's really where you want it. In comes Emolga. Emolga is going to fire off their energy, but Electivire is going to win that CMP tie. Ice Punch is debuffed, but it does not look it. That does so much damage, and now I can shield up the discharge, and this is going to set up a sick farm down for the Electivire. Electivire now very close to the back-to-back Ice Punches. Now here, what I should do in theory is throw the first Ice Punch and then switch to reset the debuff, but after seeing the damage, I realized that even at -1, double Ice Punch will KO. So the game could have been more tricky if the opponent didn't shield the Aerial Ace, but since they did, Shadow Electivire could just feast in the back. Oh no, it's another Arctibax! This is very bad. I'm going to save switch into the Steelix. They stay in, so I'm going to go for Psychic Fangs. Let's get some chip damage onto my opponent. So the Psychic Fangs is going to connect. They're going to bank energy and bring in Fortress. This is actually very fine for the Steelix. I'm going to farm up and go for the Crunch before they're able to make the Earthquake. Fortress is very slow pacing. I'm able to land the Crunch, which is great. I frame drop, and I don't get the sneak. I only got 2 Thunderfangs there instead of 3, which is absolutely brutal. They bait with the Mirror Shot. I frame drop again. And without those 2 frame drops, I could have outpaced and then got a shield back. But now I'm down 2 shields to 0, and that's basically just a lost position for me. The frame drop issue on Android remains just incredibly, incredibly frustrating. I know it's something they're working on, but man, they've got to fix it soon. It is a very frustrating gaming experience if you're on an Android device currently. I Psychic Fangs after Psychic Fangs. They should do 1 and throw, so I'm going to get a nice catch onto the Jump Pluff here of the Brine, but just being down 2 shields to an Arctibax is just an unwinnable position for me. Arctibax re-enters the field of play. They're going to Icy Wind before I make the Aerial Ace, and Electivire, it can be very scary if it's up 2 shields, but if it's down 2 shields, it's just an auto loss. I go for the Psychic Fangs. They're going to shield. They're going to make the Icy Wind. And in these 0-1s, Electivire is basically beating nothing. So at this point, it is a very safe resignation of the match. Hopping into the final match, Jump Pluff into Superior, great lead as I do outpace Superior. Granted, we get to the first Aerial Ace at the same time, but again, the difference between their straight 5 pacing and my 5-4 pacing. Again, I can't state enough how much I really like Jumpluff as a flyer. I just can't stand it as a grass because his pacing is just very poor. But I feel in a team like this, honestly, being a bit slower when it comes to your grass damage is fine because I'm very strong into water in the back. Opponent farms up a ton and we read them like a book with a devastating aerial ace catch onto the Steelix. Opponent is going to switch out into a Azumarill trainer that used to be a Steelix response, and now it is no longer the case. I get to fire off Psychic Fangs after Psychic Fangs at my opponent, already at Psychic Fangs number 2, and if it's the typical Azumarill moveset, Ice Beam and Play Rough, then Ice Beam is only going to hit for neutral, so that's a very comfortable survive for the Steelix. They farm up to 100, throwing on alignment to do so. Ice Beam, not going to do much. I'm just going to commit to a full farm down, and whatever they have in back, they clearly did not want to play anymore, as they will concede the match. All in all, I feel like this team was a very solid showcase of what Thunderfang Steelix and the double buffed Electivire can do. As far as Steelix, it just gives it a very new playstyle, a bit similar to how Ice Fang Baxcalibur plays in quite a different way than Dragon Breath. Just having these Fang moves now have the same damage and energy per turn as the old move, which was Dragon Breath, or in this case, Dragon Tail. It just allows it to be a lot more flexible, so you can use Steelix in a lot more situations, and you don't have to suffer the lack of energy generation as a result. As far as Shadow Electivire, if you can set it up in those advantageous positions, up energy or up shields, it is very scary, and having Ice Punch be so spammy does offer it a bit of unique coverage from something like Morpeko. I do think Morpeko is still my preferred electric type of choice, although Electivire was an absolute blast. Electivire, a bit stronger into Clodsire, just due to the fact that you can throw an Ice Punch as your first move, and you're going to do about 40 to 45% of that Clodsire's health. Whereas for Morpeko, you really need to exit a matchup ramped up on attack, or be in the Hangry form so you can fire off the Dark-type Orwheel to deal the meaningful damage. So overall, I do think both are very strong, glassy electric types. I do think that Morpeko's defensive typing is better. Having that dark defensive typing and being able to resist stuff like Shadow Claw and Astonish makes it a lot more convincing versus stuff like Feraligatr and Driftblim, whereas you can definitely get Astonish down as the Shadow Electivire, just due to the fact that you don't have those resistances. So overall, Electivire is much improved. I still think at the end of the day, Morpeko will be used more than Electivire, just because of the boost ability and the fact that Orwheel is an insanely OP move, but I think Electivire is very usable as well, and due to the differing coverage, we may actually see some people try it out in AVB style teams. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and a special thank you as always to our members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide is sincerely appreciated, so thank you guys oh so very much, and until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.